All right. In this section, I'm going to explore the idea of elasticity and tax incidence. So remember, elasticity is about how sensitive you are to the price. So if you might be relatively sensitive, and so for example, if demand is relatively sensitive, that means when the price changes much, the demand changes a lot. And this usually is because they have a lot of other choices. They can afford to change. They can easily jump to another substitute product, for example. That's something that will make demand quite elastic. And then for supply, it's sort of matters, well, how easy is it for them to change their quantity? And in some cases, it's really easy, and the demand will be quite elastic. And in other cases, it's not very easy at all, and demand will, and supply will be pretty inelastic. Okay, so what we're going to find out is, I'm going to kind of give you the summary before we start. Is the side that is less elastic pays or takes a bigger burden. Let's see, takes a bigger share of the tax burden. And it kind of makes sense. If you're less elastic, then you don't want to change, and so instead of changing, you'll just pay more. Okay, so that's the idea. So let's suppose first of all we have this. If our supply is more elastic than demand. So I'm just going to pick 2, and from that point, I'm going to just draw 2 kind of supply and demand graphs, or 1 supply and demand graph, sorry, and you'll just be able to see, well, from that same point, so this is going to be our point. In that case, we're going to make demand quite inelastic, and supply is quite elastic from that point. So what we're saying, well, the percentage change, because they start from the same point, so the percentage change for demand is going to be smaller because the quantity is barely changing, right? Whereas an equivalent change in price would have a bigger change in quantity of supply, so supply is more elastic. Okay, so let's go ahead and put our tax on. So here's our tax. And so let's say we put our tax like this. Okay, so this is our new decision line. And so then we get I'm just going to focus on one part of this. We're not looking at the whole thing anymore. So this is our QT. And we just for completeness, we can go ahead and put this Q star on there. And we should have put P. That's close to horizontal, not quite. Not too bad. Okay, and that's P star. And then we can go and put our other 2 parts on here. Yeah, it's pretty far away from horizontal. Oh well. You can just pretend it is. Okay, so we have our price paid by the buyer and price paid by the seller, and our P star. So this whole green box is our tax revenue. And so our focus is on who's paying this tax, okay, in this problem. So to do that, let's just label these 2 parts. Label this part A and this part B. Okay, so A is being paid by the buyer and B is being paid by the seller. And so in this case, A is greater than B, right? So the buyer faces a bigger share. I guess you can say pays. You don't have to say faces. Pays a bigger share of the tax, right? And so the A is coming from higher price for the buyer, and B is coming from lower receiving a lower price for the seller. So we can kind of summarize this per unit as saying, well, the price of the buyer rises a lot, and the price for the seller falls a little. Okay, so in this case, because the demand was relatively inelastic compared to the supply, then the buyer pays a big part of this tax, and the seller ends up paying quite a lot less. Okay, so this is the idea, and so then we can say, well, we can go to the other side. So that tells you something. If you know demand for a certain product is inelastic, and you put a tax on it, then you know the tax is going to fall heavily on the buyers, right? And in certain cases, this might be an issue about fairness or equality, or maybe putting a burden, especially if it's a good consumed by a lot of people with fairly low incomes. Most of this burden is going to fall on them. and it's going to fall quite heavily. The company actually, things won't change very much for them. Okay, so let's look at the other side of this real quick. So then let's do the opposite case. So we're going to have, well, in this case, supply is more inelastic. Okay, so and supply is less elastic than. So let's go ahead and draw it. I'll make my demand curve fairly flat and make my supply steep. Okay, so this is our equilibrium beforehand. Go ahead and label it. And then we put our tax on the supply, and here we go. Okay, it looks like they're really close together, but actually the vertical height is pretty big. It just looks like they're close together because the line is so vertical. Okay, so then this is our tax wedge. Oops, I did a terrible job drawing that line straight. Okay, better. And then, so this is our PB, price for the buyer, and this is our, and let me move the P star to be in the right spot. There we go, P star is better now. All right, so again, the green is our tax. The green box shows how much taxes we pay. But now things have reversed. Now the part paid by the buyers, B, is small, and the part paid by the sellers is big. So now A is less than B, right? The sellers pay a bigger share. And the other way to see this is that, well, PB rises less and PS falls by more compared to before. Okay, so that gives us our idea. So yeah, this is definitely true. When you're looking at where to put a tax, and then it's going to fall more heavily on the side that is less elastic, right? So if you're when you're considering about the equity aspects of placing taxes, then that's something that definitely needs to be considered. So if it falls heavily on the consumer, then that means they're going to pay a bigger portion, and sometimes that might be what you want to happen. If it falls more heavily on the company, then it's going to mean it's going to hurt the company's bottom line more, and they won't be able to pass it on to the consumer. And so it kind of depends on what goal the government is trying to accomplish with certain taxes, but it's definitely something you have to consider is where this tax is falling and who ends up paying it. The key is in all of these cases, both sides pay it. The only situation where it will fall 100% on one side is the very, very extreme situation where somebody has perfectly inelastic demand or supply. And in that case, that side will just eat 100% of the tax, and the other side will get exactly the same price and everything else as they did before. But again, that's a pretty rare situation.